Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. A warm welcome and very good evening to all our viewers. This is special series of Bhagavad Gita by ISKCON Pune. And today is we're going to discuss about the introduction of Bhagavad Gita of this text, and as well as we will overview the first chapter, setting the scene, observing the armies. So this is systematic study of Bhagavad Gita which we're going to do in next coming 21 weekdays, with one day in a week as a free day for all of us, and one day each chapter will be discussed, where we'll go in detail and understand what Krishna wants to say in Bhagavad Gita. And then at the end of session you get the answer of all your doubts and queries. Now our facilitator and the course coordinator for this is his guest Madan Sundar Prabhu, who did his MS from Ohio State University, and then he works in the Juniper Network as a research scientist. Later on, influenced by Srila Prabhupada and ISKCON founder Acharya His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, and the life of Vedic, as per the Vedic scriptures, he got inspired and moved to India as a full-term ISKCON volunteer. And then he started his Evolve Pune, which is an educational forum here in Injwadi, and conducting various courses. Now, before going to this, I would just like to welcome His Grace Madan Sundar Prabhu and ask him to start the session. Heartily welcome, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Shikharu. Thank you for being the host of this new series that we are starting from today. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, Prabhuji, you are loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Looks like there was some echo as some of the audience is saying. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to Shikharu and thanks to our ISKCON Pune Forum. We are starting this new series from today on the occasion of upcoming Gita Jayanti, which is scheduled for 14th of December. So this Gita Essence program that we are starting from today is based on the 18 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita, which we plan to complete in the next 3 weeks, if I'm correct. So this 18 chapters, we are divided into the groups of six chapters. Every Saturday, like today it started, and it will continue until Thursday. And then Friday would be off. And then again from the next Saturday, another 6 chapters will continue until Thursday. Like that, we have decided. So before we begin our discussion, I'll offer a short prayer. All of you who are aware of it can recite behind. And please do let us know if in case there is a sound issue. I see some comments about it. I hope the sound is coming okay now. So once again, thank you for joining in. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनाशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So let's begin with the presentation. So overview of complete Bhagavad Gita, Gita Essence series that we are starting from today. This is based on the teachings of His Divine Grace, Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of ISKCON. So before we begin with the chapter 1, I guess it's pertinent to ask a question: what is Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita in itself is a classic conversation that took place 5,000 years ago at a place called as Kurukshetra. It was a fratricidal war, the war that took place between two brothers within the family, war between the Pandavas and Kauravas. Pandavas headed by Yudhisthira Maharaj, that represented divinity or dharma, and Kauravas headed by Duryodhan, that represented demonic forces or adharma. So this was not only a fratricidal war, it was more than that. It was a war between divine and demoniac that took place 5,000 years ago. And it carries a very special significance as well as relevance and very important message for all of us. And what is that? Metaphorically, it is described that this war between the divine and demonic forces continues to go or continues to happen even today, 5,000 years later. However, the battlefield is not the land of Kurukshetra. The battlefield today is the heart of every living entity, where there is simultaneously a divine and a demonic sound or the voice. And the struggle or the tug of war which we are faced with every day. The divine voice gives us the direction to walk on the path of dharma, which means abiding by the instructions of the Lord, wherein we, rather than having the mentality of exploitation, are driven by the mentality of service. Whereas in the demonic voice, predominantly is indicative of exploiting others, subjugating others. And there is only one concern: what's in for me? So there is always a constant tug of war between these two, and that process is what is being described as something that we can find a relevant message for ourselves. Why I'm saying a relevant message? Just like message of Bhagavad Gita spoken by Lord Shri Krishna to Arjuna gave him the strength, because Arjuna was bewildered. Should he fight or not fight? Gave him the courage to continue to support dharma or the divine. Similarly, the message of Bhagavad Gita has the potential, potency, and the power to strengthen the divine within, to help us make the right decision. And that is how Bhagavad Gita, even today, 5,000 years later, is one of the most discussed, and actually, just for your information, probably one of the most sold or purchased books all over the world. Srila Prabhupada's translation of Bhagavad Gita has been sold more than 13 crores or 13 crore all over the world. So that's not only the Bhagavad Gita what it indicates, but Bhagavad Gita has more relevance to us. Let's take a look at it. Many times people ask, why should I study Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita. It's very important to understand Bhagavad Gita does not represent any particular religion, neither sectarian nor religious text. Why I say so? The reason is, at the time when the message of Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna and Arjuna had this conversation, there was only one religion. It wasn't called as a religion, it was called as dharma. There is a technical difference between dharma and religion, which we shall discuss some other time. There was only one dharma, and that was called as Varnashrama Dharma. What is Varnashrama Dharma? Varnashrama Dharma means where the division of the society at that point of time was not on the basis of faith. Today, the society is divided as Hinduism, Sikhism, Christianity, Islam, etc., etc. But it wasn't like that then. The division of society was based on Varnashrama Dharma. Varna means occupation, the social orders of a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, whereas Ashrama means the spiritual order of a Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. And interestingly, Krishna is himself going to speak on the subject matter of Varnashrama later in Bhagavad Gita. But point to be noted here, Earlier, the division of the society was based on the psychological and biological activity of individual, which means according to the occupation. So somebody who had an inclination for administrative life or occupation would take to Kshatriya role. Somebody who had an inclination to be an educator, to be a medical practitioner, and to be a lawyer to help out to resolve conflict will take a role of a Brahmana. Because earlier, occupation was determined based on your interest and liking, based on your psychological state. People were self inspired and people were happy. Today, people choose occupation based on where would they get maximum money. And therefore, down the line, 5 years, 10 years down the line in their profession, many wonder, did I make the right choice to take this occupation? How many of you have ever thought like this? Or how many of you wondered, am I doing the right thing with my life? Is there something else that I can do? Why I don't feel self-inspired in my occupation? Why I need to be pushed to continue with my occupation? Yes or no? Unfortunately, I cannot see any one of you here, but you do have a comment box. If you can type yes or no, so at least it'll help me know that we are making sense. So, like this book becomes very relevant. It gives us the wisdom to make decisions in our life. The situations may not change, but it is the response that counts. How many of us here in our life are troubled with or face the challenge of making decisions? When it comes to decision making, it becomes a job of stress or stressful work, a job of anxiety. So, the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita, as I said, it gives us the directions, it gives us the knowledge how to make the best decision for oneself, like that. In essence, it is the best self help book which helps us to remain progressive or become progressive. And not only this, let me draw an analogy with Google Maps. It's a very interesting analogy where all of us are aware of Google Maps. So we use Google Map where we type in our destination and gives us the shortest route, the quickest route to our destination. And in case if there's a traffic jam, it reroutes you to the same destination. Similarly, Bhagavad Gita, the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita, uh, teaches us or finds us or helps us reach our destination or the goal. Whenever we are faced with any kind of crisis or challenges in life, the message of Bhagavad Gita gives us solace and gives us direction again how to continue to remain progressive. However, there is something which Bhagavad Gita does far more than Google Maps or ever any technology can do for you or for me, is that Bhagavad Gita don't only give you the wisdom or not only gives you the direction to reach your destination, but it also defines a destination for you. Just like the way the scripture says, Asatoma Satgamaya Tamsoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityum Va Amritam Gamaya. Astoma from temporary, our journey should be to permanent, which means from the material world to the spiritual world, from the world of mortality to the world of immortality. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, from the world of ignorance to the world of knowledge. Mrityumva Amritam Gamaya, again from mortality to immortality. So, like that, the message of Bhagavad Gita helps us redefine our destination. And it does it by discussing this subject matter in 5 ways, or it actually introduces 5 concepts, which is called as Gita Matrix, beginning with Ishvara, what is Jeev, what is Kal, what is Karma, and what is Prakriti. Ishvara means Lord, Jiva means living entity, Kal means time, Karma means activities, and Prakriti means this material creation. What is this material creation? What is its purpose? And so forth. The laws of the material nature all have been described. So the Bhagavad Gita that we are going to study from today onwards, as we all know, has 18 chapters, as I spoke about in the beginning of the session. And every week we will be covering 6 chapters. Our week will start from Saturday and would end on Thursday. Friday would remain a break, and Saturday again would resume. So with that, we come to the very first topic in the episode for today, titled as Crisis Management, based on the text of chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita. Why am I titling this topic for today as crisis management? 5,000 years ago, at the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Arjuna was faced with a crisis, more of an internal crisis. And of course, he also had an external crisis where his relatives were standing at the opposite end as an enemy to fight with him. Definitely, there was an external crisis because there was a huge war, one of the biggest war about to take place. Far greater than that external crisis, Arjuna was faced with internal crisis. Should I fight or not fight? Well, this question at this point of time, at the beginning of the war, does not make sense because Arjuna prepared himself for 12 long years when they were exiled in the forest. He went to Indraloka. He lived with Indra for 5 years. He acquired all kind of celestial weapons. He went through all the training. And after all those training and everything, now the fight for justice has come, the opportunity to punish the culprits who insulted his wife Draupadi, who cheated his elder brother Yudhisthira Maharaj and took away all their hard-earned wealth and everything, who insulted Bhima, who because of whom Kauravas, Nakul Sahadev has to undergo the severe austerities of 12 years of forest exile and 1 year of incognito and has to serve the kingdom of Virat or the king of Virat as servants. Now is the opportunity to punish. And Arjuna undergoes internal crisis and he's confused. Should I or should I not? Similarly, all of us, time and again in our life, are faced with crisis. Therefore, life is said to be up of ups and downs. So, how do we deal with crisis? The first response when a person is faced with a crisis is, what is the general response people give when they are faced with crisis? They attempt, they struggle with it. When they're not able to deal with it, then they say, I quit. And that's what we're going to see in the chapter 1 of Bhagavad-Gita. Arjuna also decided and he said, I quit. Your, mine, and Arjuna's situation could be different, but our response is still the same. Therefore, as I'm trying to convey the message, that message of Bhagavad-Gita, despite being 5,000 year old, is very, very relevant. So, how does this crisis management happens? That is a discussion of the whole of Bhagavad-Gita. But let's see what we're going to discuss in the first session for today. So let's begin with it. Chapter 1, titled as Observing the Abhis. It is also described as Arjun Vishad Yog. The chapter 1 of Bhagavad-Gita begins with none other than actually the main character, the protagonist of the war of Kurukshetra, Dhritarashtra. What is the word Dhrit Rashtra means? Dhrit means very determined, attached. Rashtra means to the land or to the position of kingship. Sounds very much similar to the modern day politicians. Despite their retirement age, they don't want to retire. They're clung to their throne or to their position. Similarly, Dhritarashtra was born blind from his childhood, because of which he was deprived of the opportunity to become the king of king of Hastinapur, because he was the eldest son. Because of this physical deformity, he could not become the king, but his desire was so intense that he wanted to be the king. He wanted to become the king by hook and crook. And by the will of Providence, Pandu, the younger brother of Dhritarashtra, who was actually declared the king of Hastinapur, died prematurely at an early age. And when the sons of Pandu were young, therefore, the kingship went onto the shoulders of Dhritarashtra. With a condition, when Yudhisthira Maharaj will grow up to become an 18-year-old boy or 18-year-old man, then Dhritarashtra would have to declare Yudhisthira Maharaj to be the next king. And that became a constant fear and anxiety for Dhritarashtra. He got his childhood dream, which he dreamt all this while, to become the king of the whole world, because Hastinapur was the capital of the whole world. And now, after a few years, he'll have to give it up and give it to the son of Pandu. It was unbearable for him. So Dhritarashtra was the actual culprit for the war of Kurukshetra. However, the puppet was Duryodhana, Shakuni, Karna, and other sons of Dhritarashtra. He acted like a mafia don who would give instructions to his puppets behind the scene. And Dhritarashtra always acted saintly and harmless, or as loving to both Pandu's sons and his own sons. But actually, he was the culprit. That's the meaning of the word Dhritarashtra. First verse is very interesting. Let's take a look at it. Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre, Samaveta Yusava, Mamaka Pandavas Chaiva, Kim Akurvata Sanjaya. So here Dhritarashtra asked Sanjaya, Dharmashetra, Kurukshetra. Very interesting. Why did Dhritarashtra called Kurukshetra as Dharmashetra? Srimad Bhagavatam 9th canto describes Kurukshetra is the land, or the piece of land which is known as Kurukshetra, got the name after the king Puru. There was once upon a time, long, long ago in the history, there was a great king by the name of Kuru, and after him, this land was known as Kurukshetra, the land of Kuru, Kshetra of Kuru, as the same place where King Kuru, was blessed by Indra that anyone in this land of yours, which is known as Kurukshetra, would die, would go back to heaven, regardless of what that person has done. And this is the place where many great personalities like Sage Mudgala as well as Pratu Maharaj had performed austerities. And many other reasons are there where Kurukshetra is known as, because of which it is known as Dharmashetra. So here, Baldev Vidyabhushan and Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur in their commentaries describe the mindset of Dhritarashtra while addressing Kurukshetra as Dharmashetra. And they describe that Dhritarashtra said, particularly addressed Kurukshetra as Dharmashetra because he was worried it should not happen under the influence of this pious land of Kurukshetra. My evil minded son decide to change their decision and they agree to negotiation. He didn't want a negotiation at any cost. Although he passed on the blame to Duryodhana, it was he who never wanted that. So he was worried. That's the reason he addressed Kurukshetra as Dharmashetra. Second thing, he was also worried because he knew his sons were adharmic, irreligious, and they were at the side of religion because they had stolen away others' property. They were the thieves. So they thought Yudhisthira Maharaj, who had never ever gone against the religious principles or the instructions of the Lord, the place which is dharmic, religious, would give a privilege or extra mileage to Yudhisthira Maharaj, extra strength to Yudhisthira Maharaj, creating a favorable situation for him to win the war. Therefore, Dhritarashtra mentioned Dharmashetra to Kurukshetra. Another thing to be noted here is the third line of the verse, Mamaka Pandavas Chaiva. This is why we're discussing, just to describe who is the sole responsible person for the fight of Kurukshetra. It wasn't Yudhishthira Maharaj. Yes, Duryodhana was there. Duryodhana was definitely the one, but he was a puppet in the hands of Dhritarashtra. Third line says, Mamaka Pandavas Chaiva. Baldev Vidyabhushan describes the mentality of Dhritarashtra while making this point. He sent my sons and the Pandavas. Well, in fact, Pandavas were also his son because they were left under his care after the demise of Dhritarashtra's younger brother, Pandu. So why he says my sins versus Pandavas? Baldev Vidyabhushan explains, it shows his hatred towards Pandava. So Dhritarashtra never had any affinity or affection towards the Pandavas and was just looking for an opportunity when once for all Pandavas could be killed. So there is no threat to his kingship. And this is how Bhagavad-Gita begins. A little background or setting of the scene, what's happening or what is responsible for the impending war which is about to begin. So to make it easy for all of you, we're gonna discuss each chapter of Bhagavad Gita in the form of an acronym. Credit goes to His Grace Sadhuput Prabhu, who had made these beautiful acronyms for every chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So I'm going to refer to his acronyms to help our discussion and to help you understand the subject. So acronym for this chapter is doubt. You can see ahead of every D for the Dhritarashtra Duryodhana, there are numbers given which indicates the verses where this particular theme has been discussed. So let's focus on the very first theme, Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana. From verse number 2 to verse number 12, Sanjay began to speak about Duryodhana's army. Acharyas have discussed this point. Why did Sanjay chose to spoke first about Duryodhana and not about Pandavas? Why? He could have described about Pandavas. Why did he describe about Duryodhana? Once again, Dhritarashtra was very worried about what Duryodhana is going to do. So Sanjay wanted to affirm give conviction or pacify Dhritarashtra by telling him, just like you're born blind from your childhood, similarly, your sons headed by Duryodhan are utterly blind of or due to greed, envy towards Pandavas. Just like you are Dhritarashtra, Dhrit means determined, attached to the kingship, similarly, your foolish sons are attached to the position, attached to the rulership. And they are going to go, or they are willing to sacrifice everything and everyone. So don't worry about it. Your sons are not going to quit the war. There is no way they're going to negotiate. Just to pacify the Dhritarashtra upfront, Sanjaya began to speak about Duryodhan first. So D for Dhritarashtra and Duryodhan. In the set of verses from verse number 2 to 12, there are two things which are highlighted. As I said, this is a summary study. In 1 hour, we can only do summary study, not get into details. So we'll give you the summary so that you can later on read for yourself and understand better. So two themes are highlighted. One is Duryodhan's I and mind philosophy. And second is Duryodhan's diplomacy and his fear. So let's take a look at his I and mind philosophy. What is that? Duryodhan was highly selfish. It was always about me and mine. My life, my happiness. That is what it mattered to him. My army, my skills, my diplomacy, and I'll finish the Pandavas to become the king of the whole world. If you take a look at Yudhisthira Maharaj's mentality, it was never about I. You know, when Yudhishthira Maharaj never ever considered Duryodhan to be his enemy. When Duryodhan was defeated and captured by Gandharvas, and when one of the soldier of Duryodhan's army who survived the onslaught by Gandharvas, he went running to Yudhishthira Maharaj, who were camping in the forest because of the exile punishment. So Yudhishthira Maharaj, when he got the news that Duryodhan has been captured, if you and I would be there, we probably would laugh and rejoice and have a party for everyone. Finally, the culprit have been punished. We don't have to work hard to punish Duryodhan. But the Yudhishthira Maharaj didn't act like that. Of course, Bhima was rejoicing, but Yudhishthira Maharaj indicated to Arjuna and Bhima to go and free Duryodhan. Yudhishthira Maharaj asked Arjuna and Bhima to go and defeat Gandharvas and set Duryodhan free. And Duryodhan had come to that place only to insult Yudhishthira Maharaj, yet Yudhishthira Maharaj was unmoved. So the consciousness of Yudhishthira Maharaj was always as a servant of the Lord. In other words, what that consciousness means is how to do good to others. As I said, the divinity, the path of divinity means how can I serve others. The path of a demoniac nature means how I can exploit others. And that was Duryodhan's perspective. And same Yudhishthira Maharaj was willing to compromise or negotiate with Duryodhan to an extent. He said, I'm willing to settle down even with 5 villages. Yudhishthira Maharaj was cheated off his throne. Yudhishthira Maharaj was a king of the whole world. His wife was insulted, yet he was willing to negotiate only for 5 villages for his 5 brothers to perform their occupational duty of a Kshatriya. Yet Duryodhan did not settle. So Duryodhan was always caught up into this selfish attitude and mentality of me and mine, aham mameti. Let's compare it briefly with Arjuna. As we all know, Arjuna and Duryodhan together went to Krishna at Dwarka to seek Krishna's help in the war. And long story short, Krishna told Duryodhan, well, I saw Arjuna first, and Arjuna is younger to you, so younger brother gets the first chance to ask. However, before both of you speak or give any proposal, let me announce. I'm not going to take part in the war, and you have an option to choose either me, who's not going to take part in the war in the sense I'm not going to fight in the war, or else you can take my Narayani Sena. Duryodhana was sweating. He said, oh no, Krishna has given a chance to Arjuna to ask. Arjuna for sure going to ask for Narayani Sena, because the world is nothing but a mere reflection of our own perceptions. As we are, that's what we think of others to be. Because Duryodhana wanted Narayani Sena, he thought, what will I do with this Krishna? This Gwala, empty-handed. He'll unnecessarily increase my maintenance cost because I have to feed one more person with he not doing anything on the war. So he was thinking Arjuna as a Krishna as a burden. if he gets Krishna. But when Arjuna heard this, Arjuna impromptu said, "My dear Lord, I choose you." And Duryodhan made a fake sadness and he said, "All right, if my younger brother had chosen Krishna, I'll settle down with Narayani Sena." And putting his head down and giggling, he walked out of the palace. So for Duryodhan, it was never about Lord. For Duryodhan, it was never about others. Whereas for Yudhishthira, for Arjuna, it was always about Lord. It was always about everyone's welfare. Why? Because as Vedic philosophy says, what is it? Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which means this whole world is our family, this whole world is our house, is our home, where every living entity is my brother and sister. That consciousness can only occur or can only come for those who are God conscious and God abiding, and they were the Pandavas. So that's the first thing I am in philosophy, because of which Duryodhan all through the life struggled, and time and again he failed. Second aspect of discussion that comes in verse number 2 to verse number 12 is Duryodhan's diplomacy and affair. Diplomacy, how he begins to kind of instigate his army to take up the weapons, get ready and fight against the Pandavas. Don't get scared looking at their huge army. You are the greatest warrior. We have Bhishma who cannot be defeated. We have Drona who cannot be defeated. Like that, he began to instigate and inspire his army. Simultaneously, Sanjay speaks about his inner fear. Duryodhan was scared. It just do not make sense for Duryodhan to be fearful. Why? Duryodhan had 11 Akshauhini Sena and Pandavas had 7 Akshauhini Sena, which is literally, you can say, 4 Akshauhini Sena more. He had warriors who are not out batsmen, which cannot be bowled out. Like Bhishma Pitama, he cannot be killed. Same with Dronacharya, Kripacharya, and he had other great warriors like Ashwathama, Karna, Shalya, and so many others. When you have a team like this, why would you be fearful? It's something to think about it. And there are only 2 reasons why you can be fearful. Just like a thief, how much ever he is successful in cheating others, yet at the core of his heart, he's always fearful. What if tomorrow I'm caught? So that was one of the reasons why Duryodhan was fearful. Before we look into the fear psychosis of Duryodhan, let's briefly compare briefly the Pandavas camp and the Kauravas camp. Let's do that brief comparison between the Pandava side and the Kaurava side. In case of Pandavas, they had followed the example of shared leadership, unlike the Kaurava side, where Kaurava side had one single decision maker for the whole 11 Akshauhini Sena. First Bhishma, Drona, Karna, Shalya, and Ashwathama, like that. Whereas the Pandavas, they had 7 Akshauhini Sena, and the leadership model was such where leadership was delegated, and every Akshauhini Sena was headed by a particular leader. The names of those 7 leaders are given there. And overall commander-in-chief for the Pandava Sena was Drishtadumna, and above Drishtadumna was Arjuna, and above Arjuna was Krishna, where everyone unitedly followed whatever Krishna said. Whereas in the case of Kauravas, it wasn't like that. They had a huge army, but there was a single decision maker. So there was definitely a case of lack of self-inspiration and lack of taking initiative. But in Pandava's case, it was there because leadership was shared. Second thing, the team spirit of Pandavas. In case of Kauravas, he had great warriors, but everyone had come onto the war field with different perspectives. Bhishma was fighting at the side of Kauravas not because he wanted Kauravas to win. He was there too because he has taken a vow to protect the rule of Hastinapur. And at that point of time, Dhritarashtra was the king, so he had to fulfill his vow, so he was attached to his vow. In the case of Dronacharya, Kripacharya, they had to prove their loyalty because they were paid by the king, so they had to prove their loyalty and remain loyal to the king. In the case of Karna, he had nothing to do with friendship with Duryodhan. His only objective was to defeat Arjuna and to prove to the whole world that he is the greatest bowman. And not only that, different warriors were there who had come with different perspectives, different objectives. Not that they were divided in their own purpose. Not that all of them had different vision why they are there to assemble, why they have assembled for the war. There was also a lot of internal conflicts. A day before war, Karna became so angry on the taunt of Bhishma that he declared, "Until this old man is standing on his feet, I will not enter the battlefield." And Duryodhana was shocked, and Karna did not enter until the 10th day when Bhishma finally died. He was defeated like that. Like that, there was a lot of conflicts in the Kauravas camp. Whereas in the case of Pandavas, yet, yes, they were a smaller team of Pandavas. They were far smaller in comparison to Kauravas. Their strength was also not that much. Of course, Krishna was there, so that's a different thing. That makes it immeasurable. But still, from the practical point of view, in comparison to Kauravas, they were far lesser in number and also in strength. Yet, there was a common vision, common goal setting. There was a common one team, one goal, and all the team members, everyone down the line to the foot soldier, had utmost respect to Yudhishthira Maharaj and Krishna. Not everyone had respect for Duryodhana. Many of them were there, just like King Shalya, who was a father-in-law, I believe, grandfather or something for Pandavas. He was deceived in committing to fight on behalf of Kauravas. So that's the difference here. So that's one of the, you can say, managerial reasons which Duryodhana realized as a drawback with his team. Second thing that we learn as a reason for his fear is, we can call it as a lesson. One is material security and resources does not guarantee success and fearlessness. Duryodhana had both security and resources, yet he was fearful. It's a lesson. What it means, it is often seen in the world, people who have more wealth and possession, they're far much more scared. I guess these are people who have security guards with stain gun. There are a lot of cameras in their house, a lot of security. They have big, big dogs. Anyone living in a 2 BHK, 3 BHK would not have any of these things. So the fear is inherent part of your more and more possession. So material security and resources cannot set you free from fear. That's the point. Second lesson that we learn from this, when the individual becomes self-centered, egoistic, and is primarily interested in selfish gain and self-aggrandizement, certainly fear, anxiety, and disappointment are inevitable. Unfortunately, such an individual becomes oblivious to the effects of his own actions, whereas Duryodhana was not able to see and understand his own uh, uh, destruction. In fact, he had become so crazy that he was willing to sacrifice the life of around 60 crore soldiers, warriors who had assembled at the battlefield just for his ego, to satisfy his ego and greed. So that's what happened. Although Duryodhana was successful in stealing the wealth of Yudhishthira Maharaj, exiling them to the forest, Yudhishthira Maharaj slept peacefully in the forest. But Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana were in constant anxiety because for them the time was ticking far faster than for Yudhishthira Maharaj, because they were fearful when the 13 years ends, we will have to return everything back to Pandavas. Not only return, Pandavas will be very angry for the insult that they had done towards Draupadi, like that. After describing Duryodhana's actions, then from verse number 13 to verse number 20, Sanjay began to describe all the actions of Pandavas, which is titled as Ominous Result. In this section, Sanjay speaks about that how, he gives the different signs of victory of Pandavas, that how Pandavas will be victorious, just like the chariot of Arjuna was decorated by Hanumanji, who was sitting on the chariot, his Gandiva bow. Not only that, one very interesting thing which is mentioned is when the Pandavas and Lord Shri Krishna blew their conches. When Kauravas blew their conches, not even a pigeon flew. But when Krishna and the Pandavas blew their conches, everyone at the side of Kauravas who was standing on the feet, who was sitting on the chariot or standing on the chariot, was sitting on the elephant or the horses, every one of them collapsed on the ground, terrified of the sound that was created from the conches of Lord Shri Krishna and Pandavas. Like that, Sanjay conveyed the A very important message to Dhritarashtra. Hope against hope. You still have a chance to stop the war. Your sons cannot be victorious like that. And what is the key factor? Is Krishna's presence. So the key theme of this set of verses is Krishna's, the Lord's protection is guaranteed to his devotee. Why? See, Kauravas had Narayani Sena and Pandavas had Krishna, who was without any weapons. So this particular section, which describes about the various signs of victory of Pandavas, is because Krishna by the side of Pandavas. So that's the point. Whoever has the Lord by his side, they would always be victorious, regardless of how difficult the situation seems to be. So Pandavas were fearless. And this section brings out a very important lesson for us. And the first lesson is our faith on Lord Sri Krishna determines our degree of fearlessness. I already gave the story of Arjuna immediately choosing Krishna. And Duryodhan, if Duryodhan was given the chance, he would have taken Narayani Sena nonetheless. Duryodhan had no faith on Krishna. Pandavas had full faith on Krishna. That's the reason Pandavas were fearless. And Arjuna and Duryodhan, despite having all the material security and resources, was fearful. That brings us to the third section of chapter 1, where U stands for uncertainty, from verses 21 to 27, where Sanjaya speaks to Dhritarashtra that Arjuna, out of curiosity, ordered Krishna to drive his chariot in the middle of the battlefield. Krishna, Narayan is called as Purushottama, Ram is called as Maryada Purushottama, and Krishna is called as Purna Purushottama. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is welcomed in the pages of Bhagavad-Gita, not as the King of the whole world, not as a Supreme Personality of Godhead, has been welcomed in the pages of Bhagavad-Gita as a chariot driver. Very, very interesting introduction of the Lord. Lord, the key theme of this set of verses is Lord is an intimate servant of his devotees, wherein Arjuna ordered Krishna to drive his chariot, and Krishna brings his chariot in the middle of the army. When we talk about being servant of the Lord, the word servant today carries a very negative connotation. We just completed Kartik Mas, Damodar month. On the day of Diwali, two very beautiful pastimes took place. One is the binding of Krishna, which is known as Damodar Leela, and second is deliverance of Nalkuvera and Manigriva. And it all happened by Krishna's will, but Krishna's will was subordinate to the will of the devotee. Krishna getting bound by Mother Yashoda was Mother Yashoda's intense desire to protect Krishna from creating mischief, to which Krishna surrendered at the end of the day. Otherwise, how can you bind the Supreme Personality Godhead on whose belly lies the entire universe? Just some time ago, Krishna had shown his universal form to Mother Yashoda in his mouth. And then Krishna delivered Nalkuvera Manigriva. They were alcoholic, they were womanizers, they were very proud and arrogant, had no respect for anyone. Why would Krishna send them back to spiritual world? Because that was the desire and the will of Narad Muni. So Krishna, the relationship, the beauty of relationship between Krishna and his devotees is a subject matter of detailed discussion, which we will do it in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. But in essence, the beauty of the relationship between the Lord and the devotee is very difficult to find out or figure it out. Who is Prabhu and who is Das? And that is what is briefly being discussed here. So the key message from this section is the Supreme Personality of God is willing to accept a menial position for the pleasure of his devotee. He is not an autocratic ruler or order supplier whose only job is to punish sinners or law violators, which is a Western theology defines God to be. Rather, he engages in various loving exchanges with his dear devotees, and he descends in the material world to attract our hearts to his loving pastimes. Something very interesting happens in the course of discussion of these verses. Sanjay, while speaking to Dhritarashtra, says, Bhishma Drona Paramukta Sarvesham cha Mahishitam Uvacha Partha Pashyetam Samritan Kurunati. So Lord Shri Krishna, Sanjay said, Lord Shri Krishna brought Arjuna's chariot right in the middle of the battlefield and in front of Bhishma Pitama and Dronacharya. Something very important is happening here, and something very important for all of us to learn. And here, while bringing the chariot right here, Krishna told Arjuna, Arjuna, Pashyetan, see. Now you see. According to Vedic scriptures, Vedic knowledge, or spiritual knowledge, whenever a person tries to see with his eyes, he becomes more and more victim to illusion. Therefore, Vedic scripture says we should see through the ears. So Krishna here is putting Arjuna in bewilderment by telling him to see through his eyes, and then later on Krishna is going to remove his Arjuna's bewilderment through Arjuna's ears by giving him the knowledge of Bhagavad-Gita. Very important. Therefore, any one of us and every one of us, when we look at the world, we just don't look with our eyes. We look at the world with our perceptions. There are a lot of people who are fanatics, religious fanatics. They say, you accept my religion, you accept my God, or else I'll destroy you, right? Call us terrorists today, or fanatics and whatnot, or they abuse practitioners of other religions. My question is very simple. All of us are human beings. Why, on the subject matter of faith, somebody has to be tormented and tortured and exploited? Isn't that a male or female, a human being just like me? Because I have a faith, a certain perception. Faith creates a perception. Because of that perception, if this man today says he's practitioner of my faith, then he's my brother. But if this man says he's not a practitioner of my faith, then he's my enemy and I'll destroy him. So with our vision, which is based on our perceptions, it only creates more conflict and divisions. Therefore, to teach us this very important lesson, that we should stop seeing from our eyes, we should start seeing from our ears, which means we should first of all cultivate right knowledge. Therefore, Krishna has given us Vedic scriptures. So our chakshu should be Shastra Chakshu. Shastra Chakshu. Chakshu means vision, and Shastra means Vedic scriptures. Our vision should be based on Vedic scriptures. And that is why this whole message of Bhagavad-Gita is being spoken. So Krishna induced Arjuna to become bewildered, and Krishna will remove his bewilderment through the ears of Arjuna. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada titled chapter 1 as Observing the Armies, because Arjuna became bewildered by seeing through his eyes. Here, a very important lesson can also be drawn about Arjuna. The conches have been blown, the war is about to happen, yet Arjuna, despite the intensity of the situation, took time to reflect. Therefore, he asked Krishna, please take my chariot. I want to see who all have assembled at the side of Kauravas. Life may be crammed with responsibilities and pressing issues, but attendance to such demands should not be at the expense of quality spiritual introspection. Before Arjuna would lift his weapon and begin the fight, he wanted to one more time think about his decision. Is it right or wrong? Today, when you talk to people on the spiritual subject matter, they say they have no time. I'm too busy with making money for my food, clothing, and shelter. Now, can you imagine what would be the scarcity or paucity of time for Arjuna? Any time arrow can be shot, the weapon can be shot at him. Yet, at that pressing situation, Arjuna was willing to think about his decisions. And that's a very important message. Whoever we are, in whatever situation we are, we should not miss out on learning about the purpose of life. How and why I make certain decisions and how I can make a better decision. In other words, we should never stop our spiritual education, which otherwise will stop our spiritual progress, and which eventually would only bring to misery in our life. And the second last theme of the first chapter is B for bewilderment, where Arjuna, after seeing his relatives standing in front of him, identifying on the bodily sense, my grandfather, Bhishma Pitama, like that, he became bewildered and confused. So all confusion arises because of this bodily misidentification. So very important lesson. When we lack the understanding of our spiritual identity, our relationship with the Supreme Lord, and the purpose of this creation, when we don't know this, one inevitably becomes disturbed and frustrated by life's challenges. And that is why most of the time these days people, you find they are sometimes hopeless or they are depressed, not knowing what and for why they're living their life. That brings us to the last section of chapter 1, where it is titled as Turning Point, verse number 31 to verse number 42, where now Arjuna gives different reasons of not engaging in the war. I'll be quick with it. We have a couple of minutes before we run out of times. So this is a summary study once again, just to give you a little overview to help you further delve into the deeper study of Bhagavad Gita. The first argument that Arjuna gave was of compassion. Oh, it would be cruel and heartless for me to engage in the war and kill so many soldiers or warriors who have assembled here for my own personal sake. Does not make sense. What is the right sense? We'll discuss tomorrow when Krishna would argue against this or will refute this argument in chapter 2. We'll see that tomorrow. Second, enjoyment, my dear Lord. Whom would we enjoy? If all our relatives, brothers, friends have assembled on the war and we're going to kill them, even if we win the kingdom, we would not have any friends and relatives surviving. So with whom we would enjoy? There's no purpose for me to take the weapon and fight. My dear Lord, I am fearful of sinful reactions because opposite to me stands my great-grandfather Bhishma Pitama, my teacher Dronacharya, Kripacharya, and many other great personalities who I worship, who I respect. If I fight and kill them, would I not get sinful reaction? And then, what about the family traditions? Because all the protectors of the world, which means Kshatriyas, are standing on the battlefield, and there's going to be a wide-scale massacre. If most of the Kshatriya die on the battlefield, they have assembled from different parts of the world, then in those respective places and kingdoms, rogues and thieves will become the administrators and rulers, and they will stop or destroy the family traditions, the chastity and the integrity and the dignity of the family institution, and so forth like that. And finally, Arjuna gives the fifth argument, which comes in the second chapter, that is of indecision. My dear Lord, I don't know what am I supposed to do. Should I should I not fight? So why did Arjuna become so bewildered? The cause was very simple. His own self-interest. Arjuna was thinking based on bodily consciousness, based on his own personal self-interest, what is going to be good for him. He was not seeing the larger picture. Imagine if Arjuna would have walked off to the forest, there was no chance for Pandavas to win the war. Of course, Krishna would have been there. Still, imagine Krishna wasn't there, Arjuna would have walked off. Pandavas could not have won the war. Kauravas would have won the war, and Duryodhan being already of a demonic nature, it would have only destroyed far much or greater life that otherwise got destroyed at the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And the effect of one's self-interest was fear, loss of composure, and indecision. So, once again, where we started our discussion, Arjuna is bewildered. He doesn't know what kind of decision should I make. So most of us may not be in the situation or the same situation as of Arjuna. That means fighting the battle. But as we know, the life means up and down. We all are faced with inevitable crisis. And when crisis comes, when we do not succeed in dealing with crisis, ultimately our response is same as what Arjuna is giving here. I quit. So as I started our discussion, making a point about the relevance of Bhagavad Gita, the situation for all of us may be different, but the response is still the same. Therefore, the message of Bhagavad Gita can help us understand what should be our response in the situation of crisis. So that is the subject matter of Bhagavad Gita on the practical front, which is going to help us at this particular level where we get the wisdom and strength to make the right decisions to help us or to move or to remain progressive. So I know some of you might be thinking that I am not faced with any crisis or overwhelming situation, but please always know that we can meet with such existential crisis at any point of time. 1.5 years ago, approximately in the month of March, 21st of March or 22nd of March of 2020, when Prime Minister Modi came and made an announcement, from tomorrow there's going to be a complete lockdown. For many of us, it really became an existential crisis. And when actually COVID really spread it around, many lives were lost. So this existential crisis can come upon at any time. How we deal with it determines where we end up. When we are faced with crisis, some develop negative thoughts, negativity, and they end up becoming depressed, or even some people, get thoughts of committing suicide. So, how we conduct ourselves, which means when the life is all good, how we conduct ourselves will determine how we deal when the time is not good. Therefore, it is very important when life is all okay to actually study Bhagavad Gita sincerely and seriously. It's only going to help us face with the inevitable challenges. I'm using particularly the word inevitable, which means unavoidable, because the life loss of our loved ones, health crisis for oneself is a fact of life. So to prepare for those crisis situation, Bhagavad Gita should be read sincerely. To conclude with for today, I'm leaving you all with the two questions. If you have the time and ability to type in, you can leave a comment. So we'll get to see what you think about it, maybe now or later on. And the first question for all of you is, in case if you're able to see the screen, hopefully now screen will be visible. Do you feel Arjuna is right to retreat from battle out of compassion for his family members? What do you think? Yes or no? Is it right for Arjuna to walk off the battlefield because of being compassionate towards his relatives who are standing at the opposite end to fight with him to death? Yes or no? Please keep in mind, Pandavas never initiated the war, all right, before you give an answer. Second, if you were in Arjuna's position, what would you do? Imagine, hypothetically, what would you do? What kind of decisions would you make? And with that, we conclude for today. Tomorrow, Sunday, when we meet, we're going to discuss the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which we have titled as Inner Awakening. With that, thank you very much. That's it for today. In case any one of you have any questions, we can take that. Hare Krishna. Shikhar Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for this enlightening session of chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita, Observing the Abyss. We discuss about doubt and how this doubt can be solved by the knowledge of this scared book, Bhagavad Gita. Now, coming to questions, Prabhuji, there are a few questions. Should we start, Prabhu?
Yes, we can take that.
So I'm putting first question from Murari Adhikari. So Murari ji is asking what kind of power Sanjay has so that he become able to see the war, staying far from it. Is there any possibility in this material world without using the modern technology?
Very interesting question. Huh? He made a point without using modern technology. So you want to develop a vision like Sanjay. So, I mean, you want to see far of things. So those mystic siddhis are there. Uh, you know. Anyways, I don't want to go into discussion about siddhis and powers like that. Our discussion is far more important than acquiring siddhis, which are ultimately temporary, and as a person dies, it goes away. So I guess rather than focusing on acquiring the ability of Sanjaya, Murariji, you should probably focus on the message that Sanjay is delivering. That will help you in this life and beyond this life. Hare Krishna. Shikha, you're muted.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Chetan Bankar. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, why Yudhisthira Maharaj played the game of dice which led to the fight? Can't this be avoided by just refusing to play the game of dice?
Yes, a very interesting question. Actually, when Rajasuya Yag had ended, then Narad Muni had visited Yudhishthira Maharaj and he foretold Yudhishthira Maharaj that soon you're going to become one of the causes of a great fratricidal war. There's going to be a big or huge war in the near future, and you would be one of the responsible parties. When Yudhishthira heard this, he became very sorrowful, and then he took a vow or a pledge that I would follow my senior's advice in all condition. Generally, this kind of conflicts happens because of disobedience to our well-wishers, to our seniors, because of one's ego. When Duryodhan was at the brink of death, being beaten by Bhima, at that time Duryodhan looked at Krishna and said, "You, Krishna, you coward man, you crooked man, you are responsible for my condition and the loss of everyone, loss of every single life on this battlefield. You are the one who's responsible." And Krishna argued back and said, Duryodhan, you cannot blame me for your situation and what happened at the battlefield. You are responsible for everything. Why? Because you are always disobedient to the well wishers and to the advice of seniors. You never ever heard to your genuine well wishers. You insulted and threw Vidura out of the kingdom. Even when I came to give you good advice, you didn't pay any heed to me and you wanted to capture me. So, fearing this disobedience, fearing making a decision out of one's ego, Yudhishthira took a pledge or a vow that I would always follow senior's advice. Somehow, this information got leaked out to Duryodhana. And that's how Duryodhana exploited this particular vow of Yudhishthira. And he compelled Dhritarashtra to invite Yudhishthira Maharaj to play a gambling match, which even Yudhishthira Maharaj knew beforehand. It's a one-sided game. There is no opportunity for me to win. But because Yudhishthira Maharaj had taken a vow, he is a person who had never ever spoken a lie. So there was no question for Yudhishthira Maharaj not to follow his vow. Therefore, Yudhishthira Maharaj was compelled to play the dice game. All right.
All right, I think that's the last question.
So great. Thank you all for joining in uh, and for being part of it. And hopefully see you all tomorrow. So that's it for today. We conclude for today's discussion here then. Thank you, Shikhar Prabhu, also.
Thank you, Madan Sundar Prabhuji. Thanks to all audience who joined us on this first day and introduction and the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. We hope to see you tomorrow as well, which is Gita summarized, chapter number 2, very important chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And I hope that this session is helpful and we'll continue to have this discussion in coming days. Once again, a warm welcome and very, very thank you so much.